All right, welcome, my friends, to episode 659 of Extreme Health Radio. Thanks for joining us today. I hope you're having a great day wherever you're listening around the world. It's an honor to be here with you, and if you guys are interested, we'll have all the links and everything we have available at extremehealthradio.com/659. So don't feel like you have to take notes or any of that kind of stuff. I'll take notes for you, and everything will be available there. If you're new to the show, we broadcast once a week on Friday mornings at 10:45 a.m. Pacific time on YouTube, on Facebook, on multiple platforms, so you can join us that way and stay tuned. Usually I post a little reminder on Instagram and let you guys know that we're going to be going live pretty soon. Let's see, we got a lot of cool things happening, a lot of updates to the show. So today we have Jessica Ash, and we'll be talking with her about hormones, and I'll introduce her in just a second. But got some really cool guests coming up. Dr. Andrew Kaufman, who I'm sure you guys are familiar with this whole COVID-19 thing. I'm trying to avoid this COVID thing because it just seems like everyone's so many talking heads about it. But I feel like we need to bring some people to the forefront on that too. And so he did a whole Cox postulates exosome breakdown of the COVID-19. So we'll talk to him about that next week. Then we have Sophia Smallstorm, who is a health researcher. She's going to talk about health and viruses. The Friday after that, we have Amanda Vollmer, and we'll talk with her about using DMSO for our health. Pretty cool tools out there. And then we're going to do a couple shows 2 weeks in a row about hydrogen. And then we'll get to Dr. Michelle Lamassa Schrader about the spiritual connection to healing and the emotional connection there as well. So a lot of cool things happening. So make sure to subscribe wherever you're listening or watching today. So I found out about Jessica through my friend Matt Blackburn, who's got a really great podcast. A lot of people ask what podcasts I listen to. Definitely Matt Blackburn over at Mito Life Radio. He's been a friend of ours for many, many years. Great guy. And that's why we like supporting him and his podcast and his work over there at Mito Life. I think it's mitolife.co, I believe. So anyway, I learned about him because I listened to the show he did with Jessica, and I thought, this is really great because anybody who understands hormones from her perspective at the level that she does and understands Morley Robbins and Dr. Ray Peat. These guys are pioneers, so I wanted to bring her on the show. She's a hormone and PCOS nutritionist. She helps women all around the world with thyroid and PCOS issues restore their hormones and all of that good stuff. So let me bring her on the show and bring her on. Jessica, thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, Justin. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so where first of all, before we get started, whereabouts are you located?
Yeah, I'm in Southern California right now, so that's definitely the time to be in Southern California is during this craziness, just trying to stay sane. But yeah, at least we have some sun outside.
I know.
and it's good.
Yeah, that's right. I feel like I knew that. I'm in San Juan Capistrano, so I may be somewhere near you. So it's funny, we're so close, but we have this garbled internet connection. Like, what sense does that make?
Yeah, what's going on? I
know, right? You can connect to people in Europe, but so how did you get involved in hormones and helping women and this whole? Because like I mentioned before, you are very connected to people like our mentors, Dr. Ray Peat and Morley Robbins, and so these are some pioneers, and I'm curious how you got started with all this and helping women out in this regard.
Yeah, so I personally had a lot of health struggles starting in my teen years. Really, when I went through puberty and on, I just struggled. And I was put on the birth control pill early on to fix my hormone issues. And it was not fixing my hormone issues. It was making things worse. And so around the age of 18, I started looking into more natural methods of health. I was not finding any help with doctors, and nobody was giving me any answers. And so I kind of started to explore. That was when paleo first came out and kind of came to the forefront. And so I started to kind of explore paleo and then low carb and keto and that kind of arena. And that was very popular. All the while, I was slowly getting into the health and wellness industry. I became a personal trainer. I was working with women one-on-one. The majority of my clients were women. And I was just noticing that health was like the health and wellness world was not really helping them out, cutting calories and all these health foods. And they were just getting worse and worse and worse. They were exhausted. Their hair was falling out. And I thought, you know what, I think there's something off. And that's when I started to explore hormones. And I had recently been getting very, very sick, and I realized, oh my gosh, I am post-birth control. I'm 6 months post-birth control pill. I just randomly went off one day, and now I realize, oh my gosh, these hormones, this estrogen, I was getting this constant stream of estrogen in my body, and I was shutting down my cycle and shutting down my progesterone production. And of course I now have thyroid issues. Of course I'm struggling with my weight and my gut health. And so I started to get more interested in health. I became a nutritionist, but I was still very much focused on that paleo and keto and low carb. And I even took my practice in that direction for a while. And I was just noticing that women were coming to me already doing all of the right things, eating as low carb as they possibly could, eating, all the vegetables in the world. And they were even more insulin resistant than they were before when they were eating the standard American diet. And I was like, something going on here. And so I was really baffled because I always wanted to know why. Why does eating sugar cause insulin resistance? And no one would really answer that question for me. And then that was around the time that I found Danny Roddy, and then I found Ray Peat. And it was just oh my gosh, everything I know about hormones makes sense, because I was already very into hormones. I knew the endocrine system, but there was a piece that I was missing, and that was the piece. And Ray Peat's work kind of brought it all together for me. Then I started digging into the work of Hans Selye, and I love Danny Roddy's work. And then I went to Dr. Broda Barnes. There's a pioneer that started using bioidentical progesterone early, in the mid-1900s, Dr. Katharina Dalton, and Ray Peat references her work quite a bit. And so I studied her work and anything that I could find based on her research, and that kind of was my understanding of hormones was expanded, and now, my understanding of the metabolism has gone to another level. And now I help women really heal or restore their metabolism so that they can tolerate carbohydrates again, and they can balance their blood sugar and lower these life stressors so that they can stop having to chase these symptoms with these really restrictive diets and these yo-yo diets and these synthetic hormones.
Yeah, no, that makes so much sense. It's so interesting because the more you sort of dig around and in the alternative world, it's really bizarre because you have the mainstream, right? And you have all of their sort of nonsense that they push on everybody. And then you get into the alternative world and you think, that's my savior, natural medicine and things. Then you start getting on these, like you said, restrictive diets like keto, like paleo, and all of these types of things. And then you realize those kind of are the mainstream of the alternative. So there's even more you have to kind of go down. Just for people, because we get a lot of people that email in and ask and things about, they say they're doing the keto diet, they're doing the carnivore diet and all this kind of stuff. What's the main issue from a hormonal perspective, I guess for men and women, right, with these diets? What's sort of wrong with those diets, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's problematic for both men and women. I just think men are a little bit more resilient to stress because they don't have this hormonal fluctuation happening throughout the month. We do need to have estrogen in context as women because estrogen is that hormone of growth. And so if we're going to bring a follicle to ovulation, that is growth. If our breasts are going to grow to feed that child, that is growth. And so women just tend to have a little bit more estrogen but it should be controlled in context. And so we are a little bit more sensitive to environmental stressors, as we should be, because our biological purpose is to reproduce. And so our bodies are constantly taking in our environment, and if we're in a famine, if we are running from an angry bear, if there's not an abundance of food, our body is starting to send signals. That's what hormones are, just little chemical signals from cell to cell saying, hey guys, it's time to compensate. It's time to start shifting things. Do we really want to start to expend energy on reproduction, or should we shift our resources elsewhere? And so women are particularly sensitive to stress, but this does not exclude men. Men are going to be a little bit more resilient to the stress. The stress does catch up to them eventually. And so when you're on a keto diet or a carnivore diet, you're pretty much forcing your body to run on its backup system. And its backup system is burning fat for fuel and protein for fuel and taking those fats and proteins and trying to turn them into sugar. A lot of times we don't run well on fat, so our body will first start to break down muscle tissue or amino acids, send it to the liver, go through a process of neogenesis and turn those amino acids into sugar. And at the very last, kind of like at the last resort, our cells will start burning free fatty acids. But this, of course, damages the mitochondria, and it's not the body's preferred source of fuel. So over time, this ages us very quickly, and we start to see that we're not as resilient to stress as we once were because we are in these backup systems. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people are seeing benefits from carnivore or keto because their gut, their microbiome and their digestive tract are so messed up. It's in such knots, there's such bacterial overload that the immediate result of cutting carbohydrates, specifically starches, gives them all these results because now they're not feeding this bacteria. The bacteria are not producing these inflammatory compounds called lipopolysaccharides. And so they immediately feel like, oh, I'm less inflamed and oh, I feel great. But then you have to remember that in order to thrive in a backup system, you are running on stress hormones, specifically cortisol. And cortisol is going to be kind of an anti-inflammatory hormone. It's supposed to suppress inflammation. So if you're in a survival situation, like let's say you're running from a tiger and you step on a rock, you don't want to stop and be like, ow, that hurt me. The adrenaline's going to take over and you're not even going to feel that pain until you get out of that fight or flight response. And then you're like, oh my gosh, that really like wrecked me. Like running from that angry bear, I have like my foot is bleeding. And so people don't realize they're stuck in this stress state, and that's why they feel so energized. That's why they feel like, oh, my inflammation's going down, like my stress is or my joint pain is going down, or like, oh, I'm losing some weight. And I'm like, well, how are you losing that weight? Why is that joint pain going down? Is it really a good thing? And so after about a year to a year and a half to 2 years, we can no longer sustain this high stress situation, and we can no longer stay in this backup system. And we just start to look depleted and start to feel depleted, and our body truly just starts to break down.
So is that more sort of like what they talk about oxidative stress? I guess any kind of stress would produce oxidation, right?
Yeah, and burning fat for fuel or free fatty acids, running solely on free fatty acids, is going to create a lot of oxidative stress, particularly if you have a lot of polyunsaturated fatty acids in your tissues already. Mm-hmm. So if you're rapidly opening up those fat cells for fuel, as we're stressed out, our needs for fuel go up, and if we don't increase the fuel going in, we're going to have to get it from somewhere. And so we're either going to break down our muscle tissue or going to rapidly open up those storage tanks, which are fat cells. And depending on what we've eaten our whole lives, that's really going to determine what's stored in those storage tanks. And so if we grew up eating McDonald's, we're pulling out the fat that came, the polyunsaturated canola oils that those French fries were fried in. And those fats are definitely inflammatory. They're definitely creating oxidative stress and free radical damage. And it increases our need for antioxidants. It increases our need for things like vitamin E and vitamin C to be able to deal with the stress.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like, obviously, all of us were grown, after the iron fortification program. Morley's been on our show talking about that in the 1940s. And then I think in 69 or 68, somewhere around there, they doubled the iron, in food. And now there's people doing YouTube videos with iron firelings and in cereal and stuff like that. So we have all that. And then we have the polyunsaturated fatty acids, which you just kind of mentioned. And both of these compounds get stored because they're not bioavailable. They're not going back to the bone marrow or getting loaded into ceruloplasmin. They're not active, right? So they're being stored in our tissues. And then so when we go on like a keto diet, so this is kind of like the typical person, right? They're loaded up with these two compounds. They go on a keto diet or they go on a carnivore diet. And then it just kind of exacerbates over time, do you think? Like they feel good for a while and then all of a sudden they kind of crash or something, right?
Yeah, I think the stress makes them feel good. Like they don't realize that mental clarity and that almost like overstimulated energy is not necessarily a good thing. It's actually like they're peeing out all their minerals. They're like in this constant fight or flight state. But all the while, as you pull what's stored in the tissues, which is often, like you said, iron, polyunsaturated fats, and then I often see estrogen as a huge one as well. The body likes to store estrogen in the fat cells, and this includes estrogen that our body has made and estrogens that we have been exposed to in our environment. As we rapidly open these fat cells up, or our tissue, what's in our tissues, and allow that into the bloodstream, especially if we don't have the liver function to handle it, we are really just putting loads of stress on our body. Our body's having to break down iron, break down these polyunsaturated fats in the liver, deal with estrogen, and oftentimes our body doesn't have the nutrients to do these things because it requires glucose to do these things. So people are keto and carnivore, and they're not realizing that these things need sugar in order to be broken down and excreted properly. And so they're being recirculated, they're ending up in the brain. They will often come out in the form of like acne, because the iron's coming out and feeding bacteria. And just, you can see it on your face, lipofuscin, you know, those age spots or those sunspots. And you can also just see it in people, like you could see it. They just look like they've aged 100 years in a year.
Mm-hmm. So just for people, PUFAs, polyunsaturated fatty acids, you know, we get a lot of new listeners all the time. So just explain what those are, because in the natural health community, those are touted as like, you know, the next best thing since sliced bread. They're the best things ever, fish oil and all that kind of stuff. So talk a little bit about PUFAs just really quick and let people know what the heck those things are so people know.
Yeah, polyunsaturated fats, I guess we can consider them mostly plant fats. So they're going to be fats that are winter fats. They're fats that come from foods that are either cold, dark places, like fish that swim very deep in deep waters that are cold and dark, or like nuts and seeds, which get dropped in like fall, you know, and then they stay dormant during winter, and then they sprout during the spring. And so the fats that are polyunsaturated are meant to only really be okay during these like cold winter type terrains and environments. And so when we take a polyunsaturated fat, that is, I guess we could just call it a winter fat. I mean, it's not saturated with carbon, it's not heat, or it's very heat sensitive, it's very light sensitive, and it's very oxygen sensitive. And we take that fat and we put it into a 98.6 degree body that's constantly being exposed to sunlight and is full of oxygen. We are not expecting, I mean, we're expecting these fats that go rancid when exposed to light and heat and oxygen to not go rancid or oxidize in our body. It doesn't make any sense. And so we, as you know, kind of as animals, are made up of saturated fats. Our body prefers saturated fats. We need fats that are resilient to light and heat and oxygen, because we are creatures that are rich in oxygen and heat and exposed to light on a regular basis as a part of our interactions with our environment. And so to say that fats, like polyunsaturated fats, are healthy fats is looking at them outside of the context of the human body. How are they actually interacting with our biology and our physiology? And when you look at that, you realize, oh, they're actually fats that we would only really be exposed to in the winter if we had to eat them. You know, if we didn't have ripe fruit hanging from the tree, or we didn't have, you know, meat available to hunt, we would go and forage nuts and seeds during the winter months when things were scarce. But that is not a food that we would choose to eat. Would you go, you know, collect nuts on the ground and then crack them and eat a handful of nuts over a big ripe piece of fruit? Absolutely not. And so we kind of have to think of it in context with our environment, and these fats are not necessarily healthy fats.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's so many things like you're talking about with the xenoestrogens and plastics and stuff, and we just had a Professor Martin Paul on the show, and it's so fascinating because you combine like the iron overload along with the polyunsaturated fat, years and years of growing up on this kind of food. And then he was on our show talking about how like dirty electricity and EMF actually lowers the voltage of the cell membrane. And then as a result of that, the calcium floods the cell inside of the cell, up to 1,000 times more than it should. And then he's sort of cross-linked over 100 different disease models to that. And it's like, so you have that on top of like what you were doing, birth control, you know, polyunsaturated fatty acids your whole life. It's just interesting, all these stressors. So maybe, can you explain a little bit about like maybe what are some maybe xenoestrogens or things in our environment or our homes that maybe people don't know about that would be endocrine disruptors? And this would be for men and women, I would assume, right?
Yes, absolutely. I think men and women should be equally concerned. I think there is like this idea that estrogen is the female hormone, which Dr. Ray Feet has tried to denounce his whole life, just saying that this is not the female hormone. This is a hormone of stress. It's what they feed cows to fatten them up, and this is not something that we should be considering the female hormone. Progesterone is really that female hormone. Right. And so xenoestrogens, like xeno in Latin means foreign, and then we have phytoestrogens. So we'll kind of like take both of those. And xenoestrogens are going to be what's found in like chemicals. Lots of chemicals nowadays are endocrine disruptors by nature. So things that we're going to find in conventional cleaning products, hygiene products often, like shampoos and conditioners, deodorants, like aluminum, the fake aluminum or the synthetic aluminum that many conventional deodorants use is going to actually be estrogenic in nature. So really, many chemicals on a chemical level act as an estrogen, and all they're doing is the body is receiving them as it would its own bioidentical estrogen. And so not only are we making estrogen, and estrogen is a stress hormone, so if we're stressed out, we're making more estrogen, but we're also being exposed to many estrogens in our environment, putting them on our skin via our makeup, perfumes, candles, burning candles in our home. There's estrogens there. I mean, anything that you can think of as like a conventional cleaning product, hygiene product, makeup product, anything you're going to put on your skin or breathe in that is fragranced or has, a million ingredients on it, you can assume that many of those chemicals in these products are xenoestrogens or foreign estrogens that our body is receiving as estrogen and burdening us with extra estrogen in addition to what we're making.
It's crazy because I was reading something recently, like there's 80,000 chemicals in commerce that are just floating around, and I think like 60,000 new chemicals since the early 1960s. I mean, there's so many chemicals, and that's not counting like, what's sprayed on us in the sky and iron liberation in the soil and all these types of things, like, compounds in fire retardant beds. They're just disturbing everything, right?
Yes, fabric, the dyes they use on fabric. Oftentimes we are wearing plastics. There are certain synthetic clothing and materials that we're wearing that are interwoven with plastic. That's what, polyester is, and certain rayons and things like that. And so it's everywhere. Anything that's made of plastic or packaged in plastic or stitched in plastic, that is going to be a slight endocrine disruptor, even if it's BPA free. Like you said, there's over 80,000 chemicals, and if it's free of one, there's probably another in there. Yeah. So it's bombarding us, and it can be overwhelming, but really, truly, it's really about not like, what should I avoid, but just what should I include? Like the very basics, like shampoo should be clean, conditioner should be clean. We don't need a ton of extra products, and we should be very wary of the products we're using on our skin. Mm-hmm. And phytoestrogens are a whole nother, because like you said before, like we're assuming that everything that's natural is good, automatically good for us. But the problem is right now is this obsession with, for example, essential oils. Many essential oils, many plants are phytoestrogenic in nature. Things like tea tree oil, which are used in a lot of natural products. Lavender particularly is very estrogenic. And these are powerful, we can call them phytoestrogens, but they're also very estrogenic to the point where they can be considered endocrine disruptors as well. Same things with things like flaxseed and chia seed, and even nuts on a smaller level can be phytoestrogenic. Soy, phytoestrogenic. And these things, maybe in small amounts, are okay, but in context of our modern world where we are bombarded with estrogen, I don't really think they're okay.
Yeah, it's one of those things, like you just said. I think you mentioned such a great word, context of our world, because our environment is so key. And people don't realize, like they say, something was good 100 years ago. But today our environment is so radically different that you have to take it in context with what's going on today. And you have to look at your own, I guess, sort of life and see what your stressors are and see what you're doing every day and what you're exposed to. It's such a different life than, like I was just listening to a radio show recently about Dr. Gerson and his, cancer therapies he's doing in Mexico. And, I'm just wondering about the difference even in vegetation and all those juices from 100 years ago versus today. I mean, it's a whole different world.
Yeah, that is a good point. It is a completely different world, even to 100 years ago. And so we can't really say like, oh, this is what our ancestors did, because we don't live like our ancestors. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Like, the amount of stress that we are dealing with on a daily basis is probably more than our ancestors ever dealt with in their whole entire lives.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. So for you, with people that you see on a regular basis, because you work with women, I'm curious, because I was going to ask you, with these different endocrine disruptors that show up in our environment, how do they show up for men and how do they show up for women? But I'm curious also, with women, are you seeing more and more women with these PCOS issues, pregnancy, menopause, PMS? Are you seeing more of this? I would imagine you would be, because our environment's not getting any cleaner, right?
Yeah, I feel like more women I know have hormone problems than not. I don't think I know one woman that doesn't have hormone problems. And if she doesn't think she does, when she starts to say oh man, I'm just so exhausted and I keep getting breakouts and oh, my period sucks, and I'm like, okay, there are hormone problems. I really have not met a woman who doesn't have hormone problems.
Wow.
And it's really sad. And, they say that 1 in 10 women in the U.S. right now have polycystic ovarian syndrome, PCOS. It's kind of, overarching, kind of they can't really describe what it is, metabolic/hormonal syndrome. Uh-huh. And no one really there's a lot of people in the medical establishment that don't even believe in it. And then there's a lot of people that just the minute that they see someone have hormone issues, it's you have PCOS, take birth control, take metformin, take spironolactone, bye, or lose some weight, bye. And I'm seeing these women and I'm looking deeper. I use hair tissue mineral analysis. I'm looking at their hormones. And I'm seeing a very common observation. We've got low metabolism, low thyroid. We've got high adrenal hormones like DHEA or cortisol or adrenaline or all three. Mm-hmm. High amounts of stressors. We have maybe physiological trauma, or we have emotional trauma from a young age. We have lots of toxic exposure, drinking plastic from plastic water bottles regularly on a daily basis, taking birth control, using toxic products. We have a very interesting cascade. Eventually we see excessive estrogen, we see low progesterone, lack of ovulation, and now therefore they can't get pregnant because they're no longer ovulating or cycling regularly. And now their estrogen is turning into testosterone, and they're seeing these androgenic symptoms. And so the medical establishment is now just blaming PCOS on androgens. They're saying, you have high testosterone, therefore your symptoms are being driven by high testosterone. But I'm looking deeper and I'm saying this person has iron, polyunsaturated fats, and estrogen that's accumulated in their tissues probably since the day they were born. And the body knows that estrogen is a more dangerous hormone than testosterone. And so what does it do? It aromatizes it. If we have a bunch of stored estrogen in our tissues, what it's going to do is it's just going to turn it into testosterone. And yeah, those pesky symptoms like hair growth on your face or where it doesn't belong, and acne, and maybe some hair loss, these are all just symptoms of being under stress and being in this kind of conservation, conserve energy, prepare for this famine. You're almost in this constant famine or constant state of winter, and you're super toxic. And that's really what I'm seeing PCOS is, because I'm just seeing these very similar patterns. Regardless of what the hormones are doing, everyone's magnesium deficient. Everyone has iron issues. Everyone has copper dysregulation. Everyone has PUFA, too much PUFA exposure, too much estrogen exposure. So I do think it's an epidemic. I think PCOS is kind of this weird, obscure diagnosis for just your hormones have gotten to such a cascade that you're now stressed, your metabolism's low, and you can no longer make progesterone because you're not ovulating.
What was the number you gave? 1 out of every 6 women have this?
I say 1 out of 10 right now, but that's increasing ever more as more and more women are getting diagnoses.
My goodness. So it must just, like you said, it shows up in so many different different aspects of health. If you guys are listening and interested in this is Jessica Ash, and her website is jessicaashwellness.com, and this is episode 659, extremehealthradio.com/659. So we'll put links to that there, because by now you're probably listening thinking, okay, I need to work with her, I need to contact her or start following her or something. So jessicaashwellness.com. So with 1 out of every 10, so you said something interesting that you said like some of the mainstream medical sort of establishment just kind of writes this off altogether. It's not like a thing. They kind of just say you're crazy.
Yeah, it took me a long time to finally get this diagnosis, and the diagnosis was very obscure. Like, it was like, I think you have PCOS, but they don't really, they don't know. Even though I know, they say that you need certain things to be diagnosed. So you need either androgenic symptoms, or you need to have high androgens on a blood test. You need to have polycystic ovaries or be not ovulating. And then you can be insulin resistant. A lot of doctors will diagnose it if it's insulin resistance. That's not technically, not all women with PCOS are insulin resistant. Some women with PCOS are very underweight, but many women with PCOS are very overweight. Some women with PCOS have beards. Some women with PCOS have acne all over their face. Some women with PCOS don't have any of that, and they just are infertile. They can't get pregnant. So this is just kind of this weird, I feel like almost like a blanket diagnosis for hormonal issues that can't be explained. And it's really, the diagnosis allows them to just prescribe birth control to regulate the cycle. And that's kind of, I think, why that diagnosis is being slapped on. I think it's kind of like a cop-out in the sense of there's way more going on, because every single woman with PCOS has different hormonal issues occurring, like thyroid issues, insulin resistance, high cortisol, anything that you could think of in the realm of metabolic stress.
That's so fascinating and so crazy that so many women and young girls are put on birth control so early on in life before they're. Man, I mean, this has to be sort of the beginning, right? I mean, of this for women. It's got to be, right?
Yeah, I do think so. And there are women that I've seen or worked with that were put on birth control before they ever even started their period. So they were put on birth control to start their period. And so there are women who are 25, 26, 27 who have never ovulated in their life, never dropped an egg in their life, and now they're working towards trying to get pregnant because doctors, the medical establishment has told them it's safe to be on birth control as long as you want, and then you just go off and you have a baby. That's how it works. And it's fertility can't really be shut on and off. And if you don't have a chance to start ovulating and start that journey of being fertile and going through your cycles, then you may not be able to start that 10 years later when you kind of shut that down for so long. You shut down that brain to ovary connection. Mm-hmm. But there's more and more awareness regarding PCOS, but they're still trying to explore what's the genetic cause, or maybe the mom got exposed to something while in the womb, and I'm we're really not looking at what we should be looking at. The environment is driving this 100%.
Yeah, this is just such fascinating stuff. So interesting. JessicaAshWellness.com, episode 659 here of Extreme Health Radio. We're going to take a little bit of a break, but I want to come back and talk a little bit about fibroids and some of these types of things, hormonal disruptors, because you start looking at cancer and you start looking at the hormone connection to cancer. And so that's an interesting take as well. So if you guys are interested in her website, JessicaAshWellness.com, we are going to be right back. We're going to take a little bit of a break, and you can check this out.
Starving for vitality, we're turning to energy drinks, stimulants, and pharmaceuticals to try to improve our focus, increase our metabolism, rescue our sex drive, and adapt to the stresses of modern-day living. Each year, an elk sheds its impressive antlers, regenerating an even larger set the following year. These velvet antlers have been a revered traditional medicine for thousands of years. Elk antler harnesses the adaptogenic and highly regenerative growth factors from this natural and ethical resource into a concentrated, bioavailable extraction. Its revitalizing effects span bone, muscle, and nerve support. improve metabolism, cellular repair, sexual potency, anti-inflammation, vascular strengthening, and hormone production. Humanely harvested from free-range U.S. elk, extracted in organic alcohol, and protected in Miron glass, our elk antler is available in 3 strengths to restore your vitality at any level.
Yeah, so that's the Surthrival elk velvet antler, and I just wanted to show you this on our website, biocharge.me. If you guys want to check it out, it's a really fascinating product, and I highly recommend it. I mean, there's so many things going for it, and it's something that I'm on all the time. And you know, you can get on auto ship, and you can get these things. It's incredible, just incredible. Increased recovery time, increased endurance, promotes lean muscle mass. It's a sexual tonic. It's an adaptogenic herb. 43 to 1 extraction. It's a dual extraction. So this is just a really, really exquisite product from Surthrival, and I take it. I love it, and I think you guys would too. We don't really talk about Surthrival too much, and they have such a great line of products, and I don't know why I don't really talk about them that much. I take them all the time, almost daily. It's just one of those things. So here's another one too that kind of goes in line with hormonal sort of strength and vigor is pine pollen. Check this one out.
Tens of thousands of men have discovered the rejuvenating power of pure potency. At the office, at the gym, in the mirror, and after the sun goes down. Combining the benefits of pine pollen with its bioidentical testosterone and stinging nettle with its ability to support a healthy prostate, Pure Potency was designed to maintain vigorous androgen levels throughout andropause and to counter the testosterone diminishing impacts of modern living. Flavored with orange peel, vanilla, and maple syrup, this formula is a great tasting, natural alternative to the pharmaceutical testosterone treatments available today. Pine Pollen Pure Potency, your daily answer for natural male potency.
And also, it's interesting, I was talking with Daniel a while back, and he was saying that the majority of his customers for both, not just pine pollen, but elk velvet antler, are women, which is crazy because they're kind of marketed towards guys. But these are great supplements for hormonal support for men and women. And, you know, I just figured this would be a good time to talk about it since we're talking about hormones on today's show. And there's lots of different strategies that we can all use to, you know, enhance. But, you know, a lot of this comes, it's not like your hormones aren't working because you're not taking pine pollen or your hormones aren't working because you're not taking elk velvet antler. There's something wrong systemically in our environment and in our lifestyle that's causing these issues. And so these are great just tools that you can use to regenerate and to utilize in your own life to build some of these hormonal factors in your life. And so this is why I wanted to share with them. So if you go through our link, we will give you a 30-day trial to the Extreme Health Academy. So as a bonus for purchasing and supporting the show, that's kind of how we stay in business here, is we support good people, good products, and good people doing good things. And so check out, if you're watching on YouTube, there should be links down in the description. If you're listening on a podcast, everything will be available at extremehealthradio.com/659. And if you're listening or watching on Facebook, there should be links somewhere in the description. So hopefully that's the case. So we have so much to talk about with Jessica. I want to get into much more of her work, a ton of things she said about sugar, and man, there's just so much to get to. And we'll also try to take some of your questions too. I will be checking the YouTube comments or live chat for questions here in just a minute. So if you have any questions for Jessica, make sure to type them in all caps. Otherwise, I will probably miss them. So we'll be right back with Jessica Ash right after this.
You're listening to Extreme Health Radio, and I hope you're enjoying this show. Please share it with your friends by tagging at Extreme Health Radio on Instagram. Stay tuned for new shows weekly.
New shows every week, every Friday morning at 10:45 a.m. Pacific time. You can come join us and you can see what we're up to, and we try to share some of the things that we do on Instagram. You know, it's a good place to come join us and see what's up and all that kind of good stuff. And so I want to get back to Jessica, and you know, it's funny because, like you were saying, Jessica, before, people think that estrogen is the women's hormone and testosterone is the men's hormone, right? But it's this interplay between the two and the ratios, because women need testosterone and men need estrogen. It's just how they kind of play out in the body and what's most dominant, right?
Correct. And yeah, we tend to, because we need these contexts of growth. So we have certain parts of our menstrual cycle where we need to, drop an egg, for example, and that requires a spike of estrogen or a peak of estrogen. But the body immediately balances that out, that once we drop that egg, that emptied egg sac becomes a gland that makes us progesterone, and then progesterone shoots up right the next day to balance out that estrogen. And then, the last half of our cycle, the luteal phase, as our body's making progesterone, we have this kind of like second gradual spike of estrogen, but again, it should be overpowered by that true feminine hormone or female hormone, progesterone. And so estrogen is a part of the female experience. It's a part of female biology. We do need it, and so do men in small amounts. It is that hormone of growth. It causes cellular proliferation by bringing water into the cell. But obviously, we can see if it's a hormone of growth and cellular proliferation, it could be a problem out of context.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny. I was listening to one of our guests we do shows with him quite often. He's a former anesthesiologist, but he's sort of gone rogue, and now he's just doing primarily natural things. In fact, he doesn't even have his license anymore, so he's 100% natural. But he was saying that estrogen is, many people think it's only a hormone of growth, but he was saying it's also a hormone of differentiation. And so I thought that was interesting too, because he was tying this into certain cancers. I don't remember everything he was saying, but certain cancers are affected by estrogen most negatively, but some positively, because it causes the cancer cell to sort of grow up and become what it's supposed to be, instead of getting into this loop of, this apoptosis doesn't turn on and it just gets into this tumor growing loop. And so the estrogen helps with differentiation. I never heard that before, but have you seen that?
Yeah, cancer is definitely not my specialty. That's like a realm that I truly don't know a lot about, but I could see how, certain cancers, like for example, we have like breast cancer and ovarian cancer that is very estrogen driven. And so in these cases, like you see, with someone with breast cancer, you're seeing a lot of factors that have led up to that, just environmental exposures, lots of exposure to dioxins like environmental toxins and PCBs, and we have use of aluminum deodorant all our lives on our armpits, near our lymph nodes. We have, the intake of excessively estrogenic food. And then we also know that polyunsaturated fats and iron bind estrogen into the tissues. They kind of have this synergistic relationship. And so that is a factor. And so of course people are a little bit more genetically predisposed to not be able to break down estrogen properly. Or in the womb, we could look at it a different way. If our mother who's carrying us already is hypothyroid and progesterone deficient and estrogen dominant, that's going to be imprinted onto the fetus. The body's going to do the best it can to create a non-hostile environment for that baby, but there is going to be some type of effect on the fetus. So it is possible that we could be also born into this kind of state of being already estrogen dominant or exposed to estrogen in the womb and a little bit hypothyroid, so we can't break down estrogen properly. And I see a lot of women and families where aunt hypothyroid, other aunt breast cancer, other aunt Hashimoto's. There's thyroid and breast cancer. I've seen family trees where it's just all interconnected.
Wow. So progesterone, in the presence of a woman, say with too much estrogen, progesterone is deficient. Assuming, let's say it's not deficient, let's say they start increasing their progesterone in their body somehow, what's progesterone then going to do inside the body?
Yeah, so progesterone, there is two schools of thought, and it's really hard to figure out what is truth, because I truly am not a scientist. And so there are people that argue one point of view that the cell itself is the hormone receptor, so the cell actually receives the hormone and it tells it information. And then there are people that believe that cells have specific receptors for specific hormones, or some type of mix of the two. It's not truly understood how hormones interact with the cell. Like they kind of went with the theory of like a hormone receptor, and they've gone with it. But if we're looking at, okay, so if we don't truly know exactly how the cell receives the hormone, we know that progesterone has an anti-estrogenic effect. It kind of lowers the negative effects of estrogen. So it balances out estrogen in some way. Does that actually block estrogen receptors? I haven't been able to truly determine that 100% solidly. There is evidence that, for example, like adrenaline, in a high adrenaline state, in a high cortisol state, when somebody's super stressed out, they're not eating enough, they don't have enough salt, and not enough magnesium coming in, their body, regardless of how much progesterone they're making, you could be making an abundant amount of progesterone, but because adrenaline is present in the bloodstream, it does not allow the cell to receive progesterone properly. And so there is a lot, that's pretty much Dr. Katharina Dalton's work, is that in a state of high adrenaline, in a state of high stress, regardless of how much progesterone you're making or taking, your body does not see those anti-stress, anti-cortisol, anti-estrogen effects. And so adrenaline is in some way blocking how you uptake progesterone or blocking how your body uses progesterone and kind of canceling that out. And so hormones, the relationship between hormones is still kind of understudied because people don't really think it's that important. And I think it's very important. I think metabolism is very important, but genetics is kind of like where science goes. And so when you're trying to look for like, oh my gosh, is the cell receiving the hormone? Is there hormone receptors? Like what's going on? There's not a lot of clear, solid information. You can go by this person's theory and this person's theory and people that I look up to and I trust. But it's kind of one of those things where do we truly know? Like certain things in the body are still quite a mystery. And if science is not going in that direction, then it's hard to get a solid answer.
Gosh, it's so fascinating. I mean, I could hear people like my brother, for example, or people like him think like this, like, it's too much to know, okay, if I have enough progesterone, right? But then my body's blocking it because of stress. Like it's just, just tell me what to do. Like just tell me what to do. And I can imagine, I mean, you probably get women that say that to you, right? Just, I don't know, want to know all this stuff. Just tell me what to take or whatever, right?
Yeah, I kind of have my way of doing these things and breaking this stuff down into an easy to understand, because I know like some people don't care that adrenaline's blocking their progesterone, but they want to know why they're taking progesterone or why they have normal progesterone levels and they still feel like crap or they still are estrogen dominant. And so that's why I say, it's very important to be eating every 3 hours to keep your blood sugar balanced. As a woman who's been in a high stress state for 10 years, you've been yo-yo dieting, you've been drinking coffee on an empty stomach right when you wake up, you've been under eating while you were pregnant and breastfeeding, like you're literally growing another human being and feeding another human being on less calories than just your body alone needed. And so we've gone through 10 years of constant stress, constant depletion. We need to be lowering our stress manually by keeping our blood sugar continuously stable, because our body is going to have a very difficult time doing that after being depleted for so many years. And so the simplest way to balance your hormones is to eat protein and carbohydrate right when you wake up and do that every 3 hours until the minute you go to bed.
Ah, interesting. Every 3 hours. That's so. Now I'm curious because we talked a little bit about context, and I'm wondering, like, are there sort of platitudes that could be generalized that would, in theory, be the best thing, like you just mentioned? Or do we have to take into concept, because, like Ray Peat's work with sugar and how that's the primary fuel of the cell, and glycogen is stored in the liver and all of these things. Is there any issue, do you think, of putting or adopting that, say, correct mindset to a body that's been exposed to PUFAs their whole life, or living next to a cell tower, or iron overloaded? Like, is that a good concept, but in context, like you have to slowly ease people into this kind of thing? Or can you just put everyone into that kind of lifestyle, do you think?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that are caveats and need context, but that's why I think that eating every 3 to 4 hours thing is pretty universal, regardless of if you're living next to a cell tower, regardless of if you have super bad thyroid issues, regardless of if you have super bad PUFA issues. what eating every 3 hours is going to do, it's going to stop your body from having to eat itself, literally. So, we're constantly breaking down our muscle tissue and our fat tissue, opening up those fat cells like we talked about for fuel. And so what eating every 3 hours does is it allows us to just stop doing that. It also starts filling our liver up with sugar. Because, a healthy liver should be able to sustain your blood sugar and keep your blood sugar completely stable for 5 to 8 hours without problems. But for someone who has never had a liver full of sugar or stored glycogen before, they're going to see their blood sugar immediately drop off because their liver is very poor at storing sugar. It requires vitamin A, it requires taurine, it requires vitamin E, and we know everyone's depleted of vitamin E because of polyunsaturated fats. And so it requires certain nutrients in the liver for the liver to be able to restore blood sugar balance and keep that kind of steady stream of sugar going into the bloodstream. And so many people's problem boils down to their inability to regulate blood sugar because of their gut issues, right? Gut bacteria overload is creating these endotoxins or these toxins which are burdening the liver. And then we have, all these xenoestrogens that we talked about being broken down and metabolized by the liver. And so the liver is really our metabolic cornerstone that's supposed to be regulating blood sugar, but it can't. And so what happens is now our thyroid hormone, T4, can no longer convert into T3, that active thyroid hormone, because that's done in the liver too. And so what we can do by eating every 3 to 4 hours is just take that burden off the liver, start fueling the liver properly, stop having to force the body to make its own fuel constantly or providing the body with fuel. And now it can start to actually deal with the stressors in our environment a little bit better. It's not going to completely fix your issues, but what I find is women within 6 to 8 weeks of eating consistently are like, I feel like a totally different person. I can't believe how life-changing something as simple as just eating right when I wake up and eating every couple of hours has been. And eventually they can sustain that for more like 5 hours, but it takes a while.
So by sugar, you're obviously not meaning like high fructose corn syrup. You're talking about actual sugar, honey, fruit, these types of things, right? That are going to be more natural and not screw up copper regulation, right?
Correct. So carbs, kind of roots and fruits, like kind of just give that blanket statement, because many women with PCOS, which is primarily what I work with, PCOS and people with thyroid issues, are also insulin resistant. They're insulin resistant because they are usually magnesium deficient. They have those endotoxin issues. Their liver is burdened. Estrogen makes us insulin resistant. Progesterone helps us become more insulin sensitive. So all the factors that we've kind of already discussed drive our cells' inability to tolerate high amounts of sugar at one time. And we want that sugar getting into the cell. We don't want it just staying in the bloodstream, not doing good. We want the cell to actually be able to uptake that fuel and use that fuel. And insulin is kind of the key that allows glucose to get into the cell. And so if we're insulin resistant or our cells are not responding to this key, then we need to provide smaller amounts of sugar throughout the day rather than like big, huge meals of, 80 to 100 grams of sugar from honey and fruit and all these things. Like even though honey and fruit and root vegetables are such an amazing source of carbohydrates for the body, a body that can't handle them is not going to be able to use them properly, which is why small, balanced meals throughout the day can be so effective, because now we're giving our body a small package that it can utilize, and then 3 hours later it's a small package it can utilize, and it doesn't have to put a lot into storage. And that's usually the problem, is if it can't handle the sugar, it's going to start pushing that glucose into the fat cells to use for later. It would like to put it into the liver as stored glycogen, but it can't if the liver's super burdened.
Yeah, with over like 500 functions, the liver's got a lot of tasks to do. It's got a lot to deal with and a lot to do. So I can imagine a lot of people are probably thinking, well, if I eat, anytime I eat too much sugar, I feel like I have candida and yeast infections and these types of things. Talk a little bit about that, if that's an objection someone might be thinking. And there's an iron component to those conditions as well, right?
Yeah, there's an iron component. There's usually a copper dysregulation component because copper is very important. It's an energy conductor. It's also going to help us regulate things like viruses and bacteria and things like that. And so oftentimes there is an underlying imbalance to getting these infections when we eat sugar. But we also have to take a step back and look at our overarching history. If we have been in this kind of high stress, low thyroid state for a long period of time, digestion has kind of been last on that totem pole. Digestion is the least important thing. Extracting nutrients from your food and assimilating your food efficiently and quickly and helpfully is not the body's primary focus right now. If you're stuck in that survival state, all your blood flow is going to your muscles and your lungs and your heart, those kind of survival organs. And so digestion is the thing that usually is going to struggle the most when you're spending 10 years in stress. And so digestion usually becomes very sluggish. And so food's moving through your digestive system very, very slowly. You want a transit time of around 24 hours or less. You don't want food taking 72 hours to 4 whole days to get through your digestive system, because the slower it moves, we have 1 trillion bugs in there. We have fungus that lives in there. But the slower it moves, the more those things feast. And if those things are sitting there feasting, that's going to lead to fermentation and rotting and a lot of endotoxins, or a lot of those kind of those bacterial toxins that come from that bacteria. And so oftentimes these issues can root back to stress. They root back to the fact that food's moving through our digestive system super, super slow, and the only way out is truly through. We have to eat our way out of this problem.
I love that. You got to eat your way out of it. It's so hilarious. But it's true, because like what you're saying is sort of, not sort of, I mean, it's counterintuitive, or not counterintuitive, but counterculture to what the mainstream alternative is talking about, right? Because everyone, according to the work that you do, is doing everything wrong. They're doing these high stress diets, keto, carnivore, paleo, they're restricting sugar, they're intermittent fasting, they're doing all these things wrong. And then they're coming out of maybe a lifetime of just garbage food altogether, like everything wrong. And then they try to get into natural, then they do all the fad stuff. So it must be pretty rewarding for you to work with women and be able to turn their health and hormones around. Like, that must feel really good, and I bet you get a lot of success stories.
Yeah, I do, and it's really incredible because I like that people get to finally graduate from me. I don't want people to be stressing about their health forever and figuring out their health forever. I want them to figure it out and kind of move on. Like, yes, health is a journey in the sense of we're always learning new things about ourselves. And for me, of course, it's a hobby, as I'm sure it is for you too. Mm-hmm. But it's one of those things where I want people to get to a point where they truly don't have to stress about their health anymore. And I find that in the alternative health community, what's happening is many people are just going from thing to thing to thing. So they start with keto, and then problems pop up there. So then they try carnivore to fix that problem that popped up. And then it's like, oh, this thing, like, now I use this product because, like, I need to fix what happened on carnivore. And it's just this never-ending kind of like, oh, this problem has popped up. And I've had so many women say, like, it's just truly refreshing to be able to get to a point where, like, I know that in a year, I'm going to be better than I've ever felt before. Like, I already feel better than I felt before, and I know if I just continue on this path, I'm going to continue to heal, and I don't have to continue to try this new thing and try, like, 24-hour water fasting and 7-day water fasting and try this weird, infrared sauna device and just all these different things. It's like I can just support my body and give it what it needs, and it seems to be taking to that quite nicely.
Yeah, no, I like your approach a lot because it's so sensible and so balanced. And so, it's not, there's so many people talking like what you just said about water fasting and juice fasting and all these things. Like, I don't know why, I never really caught on to that. I just didn't feel drawn to it. I'm glad because I've done it before, intermittent fasting, like maybe fasting on Sundays, but it was super hard for me and I just didn't like it. I didn't feel called to do it. It's just, I don't know, not eating for a day, it's no fun for me,
Right. I feel like a lot of women, because we do have that underlying kind of societal thing that, if you're overweight, you need to eat less. And so not eating kind of becomes this almost like source of control where we can feel like, okay, I want to lose weight, so I'm just not going to eat. Like, look at how disciplined I am. And that's why I kind of get this overarching theme of when you look at all these health and wellness gurus, it's just who can be the most disciplined, like who can restrict the most, who can restrict the most sugar and dairy and meat, and who can, go the longest without eating, and who can, drink these weird health elixirs. Yeah. And like people are literally living off of, coffee blended with butter, and they're wondering why they have such extreme anxiety. And it's just like, it's just looking at, okay, let's get back to the basics. Let's get the foundations down. And a lot of people are just so confused right now and overwhelmed. And it's so nice to be able to take that stress off.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of conflicting voices out there. It's fascinating. I have a lot of questions here. So the first one I saw a few minutes ago was about fibroids. And this is a big issue for women. My wife is currently dealing with this right now. And it's a big issue for people. So talk a little bit about fibroids, what you think causes that, and maybe some protocols maybe for people that you know about.
Yeah, so for fibroids, when you actually look at a fibroid, you can Google images of it. It looks really interesting because it almost looks like a fatty growth. When you look at it, it kind of looks like, when people would get a fatty growth, wherever a lot of people get them on their lymph nodes. But it's growing inside of the uterus or the reproductive organs. Mm-hmm. And so it's just kind of interesting because, okay, there's this kind of fatty growth, but a lot of people that have fibroids, when I'm looking at their hormones, they tend to have estrogen dominance issues, whether it's that they truly have high estrogen, or estrogen dominance can also be that they just have elevated estrogen in relationship to progesterone. Another thing can be that they can't break down estrogen properly. So the hormones test that I use a Dutch test because it helps me look at the metabolites of hormones. So how is the body actually breaking down estrogen? And oftentimes phase 1 detox is kind of sluggish, or phase 2 detox is kind of sluggish. So if I know phase 1 is sluggish, I know we've got to focus on minerals. Oftentimes maybe zinc is a problem. Iodine is a huge problem for reproductive organs. Many women are deficient in iodine, and it's because all of the chlorine and the bromide and the fluoride in our environment displace iodine at the iodine receptor. And our breast tissue has a high need for iodine because the precursor for breast milk is iodine. Our ovarian tissue has a high need for iodine. Our uterine tissue has a high need for iodine. And the interesting thing about iodine is it's also a key component in detoxifying estrogen in the liver. And so if you don't have enough iodine or you're deficient in it, you can't break down estrogen properly. And so iodine is a huge component with fibroids, and other minerals like magnesium, zinc, selenium. Vitamin D is one, but obviously if you've had Morley on, you probably have talked about hormone D or vitamin D being mostly a magnesium deficiency issue. Mm-hmm. So it goes back to magnesium deficiency. But yeah, so phase 1 is requires minerals, and vitamin C and vitamin E to break down estrogen. And then phase 2 in the liver requires specific amino acids. And so if we're low in, say, glycine, we don't eat a lot of gelatinous foods, we're not eating enough collagen or gelatin or bone broth or things like that, we might have a phase 2 estrogen detox that's impaired, and it has nothing to do with the antioxidants. We could take all of the, estrogen detoxifying herbs we wanted, but it's truly a protein issue. We just need more protein. And then bile flow is a huge one. Many women who have estrogen dominance, their bile has kind of become a sludge in the gallbladder, so estrogen's not getting out of the body properly. And so really working on that gallbladder, working on things like taurine levels and working on bile flow can be very helpful. So usually with fibroids, first things first is see where your hormones are at. Are you estrogen dominant? Are you having a problem breaking down estrogen? Or do you just have low progesterone in relationship to your estrogen? If, for whatever reason, those things aren't the case, then you also want to look to the things that cause fibrosis. Like if you're familiar with Matt Blackburn, a lot of times he talks about fibrosis and the scar tissue that kind of builds up throughout the body. And fibroids are technically like scar tissue or fibrosis. And so things like proteolytic enzymes can be helpful for some people, but for some people they're just too rough at first. They're just too harsh. Like it's very hard to have those enzymes go into your bloodstream and just start breaking down foreign proteins. It's too too uncomfortable. So dealing with estrogen and then dealing with the fibrosis using things like enzymes and vitamin K can be very, very helpful as well for fibroids.
Do you think there's any benefit to like external practices like using light therapy or castor oil packs or any transdermal magnesium with DMSO topically on top of the fibroid area? Do you think there's any benefit to that, or do you think that wouldn't be that helpful?
Yeah, I do. I think red light therapy is very helpful for just any area that's problematic. And I am a very big fan of castor oil packs. It's very interesting because I haven't been able to figure out like why they're so effective, even though castor oil is mostly polyunsaturated. There are some immune, it almost works as almost like an IgG supplement or like an immunoglobulin supplement. What it does is it almost like revs up your immune system for about 12 hours afterwards and really like clears out toxic proteins. It can clear out bacteria. It can kill bacteria through the skin. It's just a very interesting concept, and I'm still doing a lot of research on castor oil packs, but the results that clients get from them is unreal. Like ovarian cysts are helped by them, fibroids, in addition to working on estrogen issues, and just like estrogen dominance in general. You can also put them right over your liver, and you can hear that gallbladder just gurgling and moving that sludge out. And so they are a very effective tool. So I like red light therapy and castor oil packs as well. And then just transdermal magnesium therapy is always excellent.
I wonder if DMSO would be good to use because that sort of drives the magnesium deeper into the tissues. I wonder if that would be a helpful thing for people.
Yeah, it's possible. With DMSO, I'm not super familiar with using it. I try to stay away from a lot of like things that can be harmful if used improperly, just because a lot of times people aren't at that point where they're self-aware enough to use something like that. And so I've seen with fibroids, I've never had to use something extreme. I've seen like vitamin C, vitamin E, working on estrogen detoxification, working on mineral balancing, working on keeping in mind that the uterus has its own microbiome. And so really focusing in on gut health and the microbiome as a whole, understanding that bacteria is possibly being shared between the gut and the uterus and vice versa. And then understanding like environmental toxins and PCBs and stuff like that do affect the endometrial lining and the uterus and the reproductive organs.
Last question on fibroids, and then there's one on infertility after this. But with the fibroids, do you think there is a time, or have you seen in your practice women being able to shrink sort of bigger fibroids, like lemon-sized fibroids or golf ball-sized fibroids, where is there a time in which you think that surgery would just be a better option, or do you think that everything, like my contention is that everything can be reversed because the same body that created the fibroid can also kill the fibroid or starve it of nutrients and break it down. The question is, does a woman want to go through that much work and effort and time to alleviate it? What are your thoughts on surgery, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's dependent. I don't think like surgery is like, oh, you should never get surgery, because there's certain things that are now affecting your quality of life in other ways. Like depending on where your fibroids are located, it could be affecting your bladder. It's pressing on your bladder, or maybe it's pressing on your pelvic floor and it's creating these pelvic floor imbalances that are causing incontinence and pain during intercourse. So there are situations where if it's affecting your quality of life, yes, it could possibly be reversed, but how long is it going to take? Because how long did it take to develop? It's probably going to take a similar amount of time to kind of like, for the body to do the same thing. So I think it's just really dependent on the situation. I've never personally worked with someone who has like a lemon-sized fibroid or a golf ball-sized fibroid. But I have worked with women who have like had ovarian cysts of that size, and they say that they, usually they decide to remove them because of the quality of life, like it's pressing on their bladder or it's pressing on things, and their doctor is telling them like it's just a good idea to get this taken out. But then I also remind, like, regardless of if you get surgery or not, there's something that drove that in the first place, and so still figuring out what drove that in the first place to prevent it from happening again. And also to prevent whatever else is going on because of that root cause from going on. You got to get to the root cause regardless of if you get it removed or not. Just because we've gotten it taken out doesn't mean the problem is gone.
Right. You got to fix that systemic issue. This one is from Jennifer. She doesn't really give a whole lot of information, from Kentucky, 27 years old, having trouble with infertility. That's really basically all she says. What are some of the main things, I guess, broad strokes, with infertility? Because it's also a man thing too, but we'll talk about the women as well. But what are your thoughts about that?
I think, assuming it's from the woman, we would have to start at the beginning. A lot of people will tell me, I just have infertility, and I'm like, are you ovulating? And they're like, I don't know. And so that would be the first step, is just starting to track your cycle to know if you're ovulating or not. Because if you're not dropping an egg, then you're not going to get pregnant, because there's no egg to fertilize. And so we want to make sure we're ovulating and dropping an egg, and also having sex during the time that we're ovulating. That's I know it seems very simple, but a lot of people don't even understand that there's only a certain time of the month that women can get pregnant. And so if that's already something you're tracking, many women who are trying to get pregnant have started tracking ovulation, either know they're ovulating or are not ovulating. But if you know you're ovulating, how long is your luteal phase lasting? And that's the phase between when you ovulate up until you start your period. So you want an optimal luteal phase is going to look like around 11 to 14 days. And that can kind of be a pointer to the fact that we're making enough progesterone, because a healthy corpus luteum, a healthy kind of emptied egg sac that turns into that progesterone-producing gland, is going to sustain our cycle for about 11 to 14 days. And then once that corpus luteum gets reabsorbed by the body, progesterone levels drop, and then we start our period. Or if that corpus luteum doesn't get absorbed by the body, then it turns into the placenta and our pregnancy begins. And so we want that luteal phase lasting between 11 and 14 days. And let's say it's lasting between 6 to 7 days. That can be a pointer that's a hint that we're probably not making enough progesterone. So we want to ask ourselves, why are we not ovulating well? What is our body missing to be able to produce enough progesterone? If we're not ovulating, then this is the same question we ask, but we just kind of go a little bit on a deeper level. What are the stressors that are preventing us our bodies from wanting to reproduce? And usually that's going to be under-eating for many women. They're just under-eating, period. They're not eating enough calories, carbs. They're skipping breakfast. They're skipping lunch. They're eating sporadically throughout the day. And that's the biggest problem, is your body thinks you're in this constant weird famine, and it's not going to reproduce on a very consistent basis, or want to reproduce on a consistent basis. So getting nutrition down is really important. And then the second thing I would always say is where's your thyroid function at? If you're super hypothyroid, your body doesn't really want to go into a pregnancy, or you're not going to ovulate frequently or well. And so hypothyroidism is usually a pretty big barrier to pregnancy, and is often a problem. And then estrogen dominance is going to be a huge factor as well. So if we're estrogen dominant, and this usually is paired with a poor ovulation because we're not making enough progesterone to balance that estrogen out, it's very hard to see a pregnancy become viable. It's hard because the uterine lining is not being built up properly. So even if the fertilization does take place, it's hard for that fertilized egg to implant into the uterus. And then, if multiple miscarriages have occurred, usually miscarriages happen pretty commonly around that 7 to 9 week mark. And Dr. Ray Peat will even talk about this in his work, that around that 7 to 9 week mark, we have an estrogen surge. And so if we're already estrogen dominant, or we have low progesterone, that estrogen surge might be too much to where the fetus is no longer viable and we lose the baby. Mm-hmm. So it really has a lot to do with progesterone, thyroid function, estrogen, and nutrition. And then if those things are you've optimized those things, then you start to look at the more obscure things. And I put quotes around that because they're just as important. But sleep, are we over-exercising? Are we being exposed to too many blue lights? Are we staring at a screen for 3 hours before we go to bed? Are we sleeping next to our Wi-Fi router? We start to look at the environmental factors. Are we breathing in really polluted air? Are we drinking very polluted water? So those are all factors that totally matter as well. But until we've kind of mastered the basics, it's going to be very difficult you can reduce EMFs all you want, but if you're not eating enough, it's not going to really make a big difference in your fertility.
Mm-hmm. So many questions to get to, but I've heard Morley talk about this, and he says that copper is like huge when it comes to being able to hold on to your pregnancy and get pregnant. I'm sure you're seeing that as well, right?
Yeah, minerals are very important. Magnesium, sodium, potassium. And the thing about minerals is, like, Morley is the mineral guy, I'm the hormone guy, so I see how minerals affect hormones, and he probably sees how hormones affect minerals. Mm-hmm. And so copper is one of those things where it's really interesting. If we have copper dysregulation, copper and estrogen have like a synergistic effect. So if we have non-bioavailable copper in our body, and we're actually like copper deficient within the cell, so we're copper toxic at the same time that we're copper deficient, mm-hmm. That's going to cause estrogen and progesterone imbalances. Our uterus and our ovaries have a high need for copper. I would say, I would agree with them saying it's the second most important mineral in the body besides magnesium. Mm-hmm. But the regulation of copper really relies upon magnesium. And the thing about magnesium is almost everyone is deficient, especially women, because our magnesium burn rate is so high. We're high stress individuals. Our body is not very resilient to stress. And so really, a lot of times infertility can boil down to that magnesium issue and just not getting enough bioavailable copper in the form of like grass-fed beef liver. I've had women who couldn't get pregnant for 10 years get pregnant with just eating every 3 hours, taking grass-fed beef liver or eating grass-fed beef liver, eating oysters, and doing magnesium.
Wow, that's interesting. All right, good question here from Eileen. Wants to know, can we talk about dairy and hormones, and why does dairy and hormones get such a bad rap? I'm guessing she's meaning like the hormones that are given to cows, like conventional dairy. But I guess in the natural health, I guess kind of the idea is that she's trying to figure out like why in a natural health world, I guess, is dairy considered so bad?
Yeah. I mean, that's like the hill that people die on with me. They cannot handle that I am pro-dairy.
Yeah, I know, right?
Because dairy is so inflammatory, quote unquote. Dairy is so estrogenic, quote unquote. Like, how could you, and dairy causes acne. That's the biggest, those are the arguments that I always hear. It's like, right. Dairy increases insulin because of IGF-1. They think like IGF-1, insulin like growth factor, and insulin are the same thing because mm-hmm. IGF-1 has the word insulin in it. There's just so many misconceptions. But I think the biggest thing is just understanding that a lot of the propaganda, we can call it, surrounding dairy is just kind of false. It's being perpetuated by this idea that plant-based diets are the healthiest way to live, that plant-based diets are the most sustainable diets, and so therefore nuts and seed milks must be so much healthier for you. Not looking at the fact that nuts and seeds are probably more estrogenic than milk is. And then milk, we can't even really call these milk alternatives milk truly, because true milk, like cow's milk and goat's milk and sheep's milk, they all have fat-soluble vitamins like vitamins A, D, and K. They have protein. They have this special sugar called lactose, which can be very incredible for the metabolism. But many people are reacting to dairy because they're low in progesterone and their thyroid function is low. It requires progesterone and T3 to be able to produce the lactase enzyme, which is the enzyme that breaks down lactose. It can also be problematic if you have all that bacteria overgrowth we talked about in the small intestine, and your small intestine is constantly being irritated by like kale salads and like nuts and seed bars and things like that. Like, of course, dairy is going to cause a problem because it is this protein that can leak into the bloodstream, and then the immune system is going to attack it. But is it really the dairy's fault, or is it the fact that we have, like, our guts are being constantly irritated and there's overgrowth of bacteria? So usually the inability to digest dairy there's a root cause problem to that, and it's not dairy that's the problem at all. I mean, yeah, of course, we don't want to be eating tons of conventional dairy. That's, who knows what those cows are fed, and who knows what those cows are given in regards to like antibiotics. But the idea that there's estrogen in milk or, hormones automatically in milk is not true, because that would make no sense. Like, that would, it's very similar to breast milk. Like, yeah, we have some estrogen, some progesterone, some thyroid. Those are hormones that are circulating in our bodies. So of course there's going to be some of that in the milk. It's not like a hormone supplement going into our baby's body. Like, that would be counterproductive.
Yeah, fascinating. I just started trying Matt Blackburn's Dairy Absorb, and so I eat some raw cheese, and I haven't gotten back into raw milk yet, but I do raw cheese, I do colostrum, I do butter and ghee and these types of things. But he's got a little enzyme called Dairy Absorb, so I've been trying that, and so far so good. But like you said, it's context, right? Because people will say, dairy's bad, but why is it bad? Because all these systems in our body are unregulated or out of control, and then so we just blame it on something like dairy. And that makes sense because it's going back to context of how our bodies are reacting to our environment, right?
Right. And then also we can say like blanketly dairy's bad, but are we talking about like organic non-homogenized, organic homogenized? Are we talking about grass-fed homogenized, grass-fed non-homogenized? Are we talking about raw? There's so many factors with dairy, and it's like every little thing changes the makeup of that product and how our body reacts to it and interacts with it.
Yeah, I agree. So another question here from Dr. Ace Harden, who's a member of our academy. Very, very cool. He says, question, how do you fix the hormones when a woman is going through menopause? This is a question you get a lot, I'm sure, without taking synthetic hormones. So the whole menopause, question is there.
Yeah, I think the idea that is being perpetuated, that menopause has to be this like harsh hormonal change, is just perpetuated by the fact that women are on hormonal birth control for sometimes 20 years before they go through menopause. They've had low progesterone for 15 years before they go through menopause. They have had thyroid issues for 10 to 15 years before they go through menopause. And so that by the time that the ovaries stop ovulating and making progesterone, we're still bombarded by estrogen. Our ovaries aren't the only organ that makes estrogen. It's in our tissues, it's in our water, it's in our environment, and it's also being made by our fat cells. So, just because our ovaries are no longer making estrogen doesn't mean we're not getting bombarded by estrogen. The only change that happens in menopause is we stop making progesterone, and that's the problem. And Ray Peat talks about, Dr. Ray Peat, his articles on menopause are really interesting for people that want to learn more about menopause, because he talks about how this idea that we need to replace estrogen for menopausal women is really bizarre. And it actually can be quite dangerous. Women who are menopausal, they usually by that point, they're so iron toxic. And iron does accumulate in the ovarian tissue. And so that's why early menopause occurs, is because the iron is actually getting the ovaries to the point where they can no longer ovulate. And so you go through this early menopause from iron overload. And so that's just kind of a tangent to say that, like, by the time that let's say we're going through menopause at 55 years old, our body is so overloaded with iron. We're almost definitely hypothyroid. We're almost definitely estrogen dominant, and we desperately need that progesterone. We desperately need it to balance everything out. And so the minute that our body stops producing it, because we're stopping ovulation regularly, we should probably replace it to keep our thyroid function up and to keep our estrogen dominance at bay. And for most menopausal women, I simply focus on, I kind of just take it into mind that they've had all these stressors accumulate over the course of their whole life. Actually, I would say every menopausal woman I've ever worked with has a thyroid issue, has high cortisol or adrenaline issues. Their adrenals are so depleted of potassium and sodium. They're magnesium deficient, and they're estrogen dominant. Almost every single one I've worked with is estrogen dominant. And so progesterone is kind of that like menopausal savior, bioidentical progesterone. But yeah, for people that want to learn more about the science behind that, Dr. Rapey's articles will really open up a door to go do further research on that topic, because it's a misunderstood topic.
Mm-hmm. Here's a good question about copper IUDs. What are your thoughts about them for birth control? Good question.
Yeah, copper IUDs are, I would say, there's always a trade-off. There's always kind of a consequence to any type of, I guess you could call it like contraceptive birth control, whether it's like synthetic hormone contraceptive or just something to contracept conception. And so, copper IUDs, or placing any type of device into the uterus, does have consequences. It's not it's not natural to have an IUD placed up there, and so it can be problematic in and of itself, just the physical idea of it physically being there. not talking about what the copper IUD is actually doing. So the point of the copper IUD is to make sure there's copper ions in the uterus so the sperm cannot meet the egg. And it's kind of like these copper ions get into, usually they can get into like the fallopian tubes, they can get anywhere that conception would occur, and they can contracept that conception. And so these copper ions kind of cause the sperm to go crazy and not be able to meet the egg. But like you've probably talked about with Morley, is there are, copper has other effects. It has antibacterial effects, and if we know that the uterus has its own microbiome, that can be problematic. Putting a lot of non-bioavailable copper in the body can dysregulate things like iron and zinc. And so there are some downfalls to a copper IUD. I would say it's probably the safest form of contraceptive if you need something other than like the fertility awareness method. But understanding that women can only get pregnant for 24 hours, 1 day a month, is very important for most people to understand. I think people are not willing to do the work and kind of understand what the fertility window is and understand that. But once you understand your body, and once women are understanding when they can get pregnant, it's first of all very empowering for women to just understand their cycles. But second of all, it's quite easy to prevent conception unless they don't want to.
Mm-hmm. So that kind of leads into this question about general birth control. What are your thoughts about general birth control, and what are the best methods if you're not looking for birth control from pills and pharmaceuticals and things?
Yeah, I mean, if you need something and you're not really wanting to do the work, or maybe not in a long-term relationship where, partners can be on the same page, then it is important to kind of do what's best for you. I think that's always important. But from a health perspective, every single type of birth control, whether it's the birth control pill, which shuts down our cycle altogether, shuts down our progesterone production, or the hormonal IUD, which is a small dosage of progestin only, which is, comes with its own problems, or the copper IUD, which is a non-hormonal form, but the way that it's affecting conception is still going to affect us on the cellular level. There's always going to kind of be this give and take if we want I guess we could say the easy route. The best form of birth control, in my opinion, is the fertility awareness method. A lot of people think it's the rhythm method, you just guess when you're ovulating and you're kind of I don't know, or you go by what an app says, and it's no, it's really, you can read the book called Taking Charge of Your Fertility by but her name is Toni Weschler. And she's devoted her whole life to educating women on how to track their fertility cues so that they know exactly when they're fertile and they know exactly when their fertility window is. And you can use something as simple as just your cervical mucus, your basal body temperature, and your cervical position to know exactly when you're fertile.
Interesting. Okay, that's good to know. Let's see. I'm just trying to burn through some of these questions here. A lot of people are listening and want to know about these things. Okay, so this is another one from YouTube about, let me go back to it real quick. How do you boost progesterone levels to get rid of the symptoms of menopause?
Yeah, so some women who are in menopause are to a point where they truly need to supplement bioidentical progesterone. Because we're not making it anymore, it's very difficult for our body to make it. Our adrenal glands can make it slightly, but really we're not going to get the amount that we want. And so after menopause, it's kind of one of those things where it's a good thing to explore bioidentical progesterone. But just doing bioidentical progesterone doesn't fix anything if we're not doing the lifestyle stuff as well. We should be looking towards lowering stressors. Everything that I talked about in this episode today does apply to women who are in menopause or not. It's just, we're no longer, after we go through menopause, we're no longer making that progesterone from the ovaries. We're no longer ovulating. And so we might want to replace that progesterone. But we still need to be focusing on thyroid function. We still need to be lowering stress hormones and balancing our blood sugar. We still need to be focusing on detoxifying estrogen from the body and making sure it's getting out efficiently. We still need to be focusing on our liver health and our gut health. All those things do matter for someone whether they're cycling or not. It's just the only change is that after menopause, we really can't make a lot of progesterone, and so supplementing can sometimes be helpful.
Okay, cool. A couple more and we'll call it quits. Let's see. Okay, Vinny wanted to know what was a doctor that spoke about EMFs. That was Dr. Martin Paul. He was on our show recently, and he also wants to know, is keto a temporary thing? Keto diet, what do you think?
Yeah, like if it's a fad, I think it will probably be a fad. I mean, the Atkins diet was pretty much the keto diet, and it was kind of this fad that died out. But yeah, I think people are starting to wake up. I feel like there's a lot of people in this community that I'm in that are starting to speak out against things like fasting and going to low carb and all of these things. And so people are really starting to wake up. I have a lot of people that are like former keto community have come over and said like, wow, this is life changing for me. Like implementing carbohydrates back into my diet has been everything to me and like life changing, saved my life. And so I do think it's going to be temporary in the sense of like it is a fad, but then there's also going to be those people that are just always for it. Like they got to just go lower and lower carbs.
Yeah, I hear you. We're with Jessica Ash. Our website is Jessica Ash Wellness, and the show page for today is extremehealthradio.com/659. We'll do 2 more questions, and then I want to tell people about your program and how you work with people. So that's really, really important. People can go deeper with you. So let's do these final 2 questions. Let's see. I'm kind of breaking protocol here, going over to Facebook, because these are pretty good. So this is from our Extreme Health Radio Facebook. Okay, the first question, first of the last 2, is from Laura, and she wants to know what is good for histamine intolerance caused by hormonal imbalance. Histamine intolerance.
Yeah, so histamine intolerance is usually driven by a few different things. Magnesium deficiency is one. Yeah, copper does regulate histamine. And so histamine is not bad in it of itself. It's an important, almost like component of protein that helps us make stomach acid, and it does a lot of functions in the body. But if we can't break it down properly, or our body is just overloaded with histamine, it can cause all types of symptoms like hives and rashes and heat intolerance and gut issues. You know, we can feel really gross after we eat like histamine-rich foods like cheese or gelatin or bone broth or things like that. And so histamine issues are going to be driven by the copper dysregulation issues, which is usually a magnesium deficiency. And then we have usually low progesterone and estrogen dominance because estrogen drives histamine up. And so I know that was her question, is she knows that histamine is being driven by estrogen. And so focusing on the things that are going to help you detox estrogen, like something as simple as eating a raw carrot every single day, can be very, very helpful. If you can tolerate orange juice, some people can tolerate orange juice who have histamine issues, pulp-free. That can help lower estrogen levels in the body. Sometimes like a spore-based probiotic can be very helpful. And just working on speeding up the digestive system. So focusing on eating the foods that you can eat, like protein and carbohydrate, and balancing that blood sugar so you can speed up transit time, because transit time is usually the part of the problem with histamine issues, because that's allowing estrogen to just kind of sit there in the gut when the body's trying to get it out of the body. And so it's just sitting there being reabsorbed and recirculated. So it's really about speeding up transit time. Raw carrot salad can help, and trying to do the things that are going to lower estrogen as much as possible while boosting progesterone.
Okay, so you and I know what raw carrot salads are, but for people that don't know, who aren't familiar with this whole thing, just really quickly explain that so people know what the heck they're doing and why they're doing that.
Yeah, so raw carrot fiber is very anti-estrogenic. It binds to estrogen in the digestive tract. And so when we are detoxing estrogen, our liver breaks it down into bile. That bile gets pushed into the gallbladder, and then the gallbladder, every time we eat fat, the gallbladder secretes that bile with our food, and it's going to move through our digestive tract, and all the junk that was in that bile is supposed to be secreted. And so for people who have slow digestive time, or they have digestive issues, they're having a hard time getting estrogen out of that digestive system. It's already detoxified. It's supposed to get out of the body. And so doing something like a raw carrot, which can bind to estrogen every single day, doing it consistently, can help get that estrogen out of the body quicker and not get reabsorbed by the body. It also is very antibacterial, and so it's going to lower bacterial toxins and things like that. And then the addition with the raw carrot salad is just a shredded raw carrot, a little bit of melted coconut oil or olive oil or MCT oil, a little splash of white vinegar, and a little bit of sea salt. And all those components are all antibacterial, and so they're going to just work to further lower that bacterial load and keep your digestive system clear. And that alone can truly help fix histamine issues if you're just doing it consistently every single day.
So it's not really about the beta carotene or the nutrition. It's more for endotoxin removal and to improve peristalsis and things like that, right?
Yeah, kind of act like a scrub brush and get that junk out.
Okay, cool. One final question from Sandy Mack on Facebook. What would be the protocol to rejuvenate vaginal health? So dryness, painful intercourse after 25 years in menopause. And she said she went into early menopause. So protocol to rejuvenate vaginal health.
Yeah, vaginal health can be something that it's multiple things. So it's this tissue that's very, very sensitive to hormones. It's very, very sensitive to what is placed in it. So looking back, when you did have your period, did you use a lot of like conventional period products? If it, tampons soaked in glyphosate was used, that's very estrogenic. A lot of times cotton products are kind of like sprayed with chemicals and things like that. And so just kind of understanding like vaginal tissue has maybe been through a little bit of trauma or absorbed a lot of things from its environment is important. And so fat-soluble vitamins are so important, specifically vitamin A and vitamin E. A lot of women have reported success making cocoa butter suppositories, because cocoa butter is very rich in both vitamin A and vitamin E. And you can simply melt the cocoa butter down, put it in a suppository, kind of like insertable. And a lot of women will use that daily to kind of like lubricate and also provide vitamin A and vitamin E. So that's something that I've never personally tried, but a lot of women have said that that works for them very well. Another thing is kind of observing progesterone. So a lot of times after menopause and even before menopause, women are low in progesterone. And that's what's kind of driving your like vaginal dryness and libido issues. And the vaginal tissue is very sensitive to estrogen. And so kind of, even though, you've gone through menopause and you're no longer cycling, are you still struggling with estrogen dominant symptoms? Maybe headaches or migraines or anxiety, depression here and there, thyroid issues, things like that. And so that can still be a factor even once we've gone through menopause, if not more so, because we're no longer shedding the uterine lining. So that's kind of like a monthly iron detox. And so when we're no longer menstruating, we're no longer getting that kind of monthly iron detox. And so giving blood can be really helpful after we go through menopause, once a season, to kind of get rid of that old blood and have our body make some new blood and get rid of that extra iron. But yeah, I usually, when it comes to the vaginal tissues, you always want to look at estrogen, progesterone, and fat-soluble vitamins.
Awesome. Good stuff. It's really cool because there's so many people, I just feel like there's so many people giving not wrong advice, but I think this advice that's not going to move the needle. And I love when people like you are out there helping women with these very specific issues, but from an unconventional approach that works, And so this is going to be a resource. We're going to save this interview and send it out to a lot of people because I feel like it's really important for people to understand the kind of work that you're doing and having success. So tell people a little bit about, like, can they work with you? I know you are redoing your website, but at one point you had a course, right? And then you also work with people one-to-one?
Yeah. So I work with people one-on-one, and I also have an online course that people can go through called Fully Nourished. I can only help so many people at a time, and so often my waiting list is 2, 3, 4 months. And so the DIY course Fully Nourished is something that you can purchase at any time, and it teaches you all the principles that I talked about today. So the frequent eating, how to combine meals with protein, carb, and fat, what foods to focus on, what foods could maybe be sabotaging you, and then the lifestyle things like sunlight and exercise and things like that. So it's a great way to build your foundations if you're wanting to work with me and dig deeper. My one-on-one work is a little bit deeper digging. So I expect you to have some foundations down, to have gone through Fully Nourished or something similar, to know metabolic nutrition. And then in my one-on-one work, we use a hair tissue mineral analysis and a hormone test. And we dive a bit deeper and create maybe a specific protocol or make some tweaks and changes to help you get to where you want to go. But yes, that will be available. My website should be done very soon, and that will be at justcashwellness.com. And my course is called Fully Nourished, which people can still access on my Instagram, but it will be on my website once it's up.
Okay, cool. See, I was just going to ask you because your website's being redeveloped right now, but maybe people are watching this in the future and it will be ready then. But it's on Instagram. There's a link to the Fully Nourished course on Instagram.
Yes, in that link in my bio, they can access that from that link.
Awesome. Okay, cool. I'm going to tell my wife about this because this is good stuff. This is great.
Good.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for being on, and thanks for the work that you do. And I really appreciate it. I'm glad I found you through Matt, and I really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really, really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, so being in Southern California, what are you going to do? Anything fun planned for the rest of the day? Hopefully?
I'm probably just going to lay out and go get some sun. It was cloudy this morning, but it looks like it's a little sunnier. And I've got to take my dog on a walk. I have a German Shepherd, so he needs exercise. He's probably waiting at the door right now.
Yeah, a lot of requirements, right?
Yeah, when he's quiet like this, I worry.
Yeah, totally. What's he chewing on, right?
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
awesome.
Exactly.
Well, awesome. Thanks again, Jessica. We'll hang up now, and I'll be in contact via email and send this link, and so you can check it out and stuff. But I really appreciate you and your time today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Justin.
All right. Thanks a lot, Jessica. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, there you go, guys. Jessica Ash Wellness. Everything that she talked about was going to be at Jessica Ash Wellness. Jessica, Jessica, ashwellness.com. Actually, let me take her thing off so that it's not there anymore. But I hope you guys enjoyed that show. I thought it was really interesting. One of the points that she made about early menopause and the connection between iron overload and early menopause. Fascinating, right? So if you guys know anybody that's dealing with some of these issues, PCOS, infertility, I know you're probably thinking in your head, okay, I got this friend who's trying to get pregnant, that friend that can't get pregnant, periods, menopause, birth control, pregnancy and healthy pregnancy, fibroids, things like that, endotoxins, stress, or maybe just women that you know that are sort of doing the keto thing and jumping from diet to diet to diet. We didn't even get into aromatase inhibitors today. There's so many things that we didn't get into. But if you know of any women like that, I would really appreciate it if you could send this over to them. I really, really appreciate that. That way they can get some information, some help. Hopefully that can help them, in their life. So really quickly, I wanted to share with you a couple things that you might like. One of them is the Relax Far Infrared Sauna. And if you guys don't know, we sell what I think is the best portable sauna in the world. This thing is amazing. Let me bring it up on the screen for you guys to check it out. Sauna therapy should be a part of, I believe, everyone's detox protocol. I do it probably 3 days a week now. I used to be like 6 days a week. But we had twin boys 2 years ago, and I'm having a difficult time breaking away and doing that. But sauna therapy is just absolutely incredible. And here's our biological dentist, Dr. Stuart Nunley, talking about how he was removing mercury fillings for many, many years before he woke up to nutrition and health and biological dentistry. And he was using or removing mercury fillings without the proper protection. And he thought he had Lou Gehrig's disease. And listen to what he had to say.
You know what I chose to do? I chose to go very, very slow as I detox. So one of the things that I did is I invested in an infrared sauna, which was huge. That was a big, big part of my healing because, interestingly enough, many times patients who have heavy metal toxicity lose the ability to sweat. And so I was one of those. I could not break a sweat. And the infrared sauna helped me to retrain my body to be able to sweat. It was a huge part of my overall detox.
Doesn't Hal Huggins, Dr. Huggins, say as long as there's more going out than what's coming in, you're okay?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think he's right. I think he's absolutely right on that.
Yeah, Dr. Nunley, for those that don't know, if you're looking for a good biological dentist, not a good, in my opinion, the best in the world. He is incredible. We live in Southern California, and just for a little context, we drive out to Marble Falls, Texas, just to go to this guy. He's that good. And the teeth and oral pathology is one of the first places you should start when it comes to your health, as well as hormones and environment and light. But man, I'm telling you guys, if you're looking for the best biological dentist in the world, in my opinion, Dr. Stuart Nunley, salt of the earth guy. His website is healthysmilesforlife.com. I just wanted to give him a plug because I love the guy so much. But here's Dr. Christopher Shade talking about sauna therapy as well.
How do I detoxify from plastics? I mean, you guys are using a sauna, and that's something I'd like to get. And what does a sauna do for us? A sauna is great. It's moving a number of different toxins. Remember, we talked about the mice, that if you put PCBs in there, then that made the mercurial that much worse. And sweating moves out a lot of plastics, volatiles, fat-based toxins. It's really good at moving those out, sweating those out. So that's how you're getting those out, and those are contributing to this synergistic soup inside the body. And so that's why they're good, is they're taking out a bunch of the different things in the soup.
Yeah, sweating, like I said, is, before been used in ancient cultures for thousands of years to get rid of environmental toxins. And now, more than ever, sweating should be a part, in my belief, a regular part of your daily lifestyle. I mean, it just has to be, with the glyphosates in the air, the parasites everywhere, the EMF. I mean, you have to give your body a chance to heal. So the Relax Far Infrared Sauna is our pick of the week. We love this thing. We use it. We've been using it for about 8 years now, and we turn everyone on to it. It's the best. I love it. We ship it around the world, and it's available at biocharge.me. And you can check it out. We sell it. There's 3 options: one for the domestic United States, one for Canada and Alaska and Hawaii, and then one for the rest of the world. So different shipping prices on those. And finally, something else that we talked about on today's show, but barely kind of touched on, is blue light, and what blue light does to not just your hormones, but to your overall mitochondrial health and your ability to create ATP and disease progression. Blue light in the form of non-native EMF is incredibly important to mitigate, and you probably notice I'm wearing these orange glasses from Blue Blocks. They're available in our store, but listen to what our Dr. Sam Byrne had to say about blue light here.
You've got the optical systems you're looking through, and then, as you say, the screen time. When people use their digital device at night in dim light, the pupils dilate more. And so more of that blue light is going to get in because of the dilated pupil. But they're not using blue blockers, and they're not, doing eye supplements or eating foods that protect their eyes. So this blue light, it's a chaotic, very fast wavelength. It's going to damage the tissue in our eyes. No question about it. It's really critical. The lens of our eye, our original hardware, has a pigment that blocks the damaging blue light. But those plastic lenses that they put in the eye do not have the pigment that blocks the damaging blue light. So when people get the cataract surgery, then they're more susceptible to getting macular degeneration, because that blue light can damage the macula. So they need to wear blue blocking lenses and protect their eyes, because these plastic lenses leave you wide open to be vulnerable to get the damage from the blue light. We're not sleeping well. We're exposed to all this blue light. So take your pick. There's probably, with all the people you have on your show, you could probably put that together and say, well, these are contributing factors in why our eyes are letting us down.
Yeah.
It's all of the above and more.
Yeah, it is. It's all of the above and more. And so check out what these glasses are. You probably see me wearing them, and they're from a company called Blue Blocks, and you get them on biocharge.me or biochargeme.com. And these are the ones that I wear every single day. Anytime I'm indoors, I mitigate blue light because of its effect on mitochondrial health, specifically ATP production. And it's a whole sort of science that you can get into. But suffice it to say that high frequency blue light breaks down tissue in your eye, and you're seeing a lot more glaucomas these days, macular degeneration, all kinds of eye issues, and blindness, even wet and dry macular degeneration. And this cascades into our hormonal system and into our mitochondrial ATP production, which affects cancer growth rates. I mean, this is like a huge, huge issue. And one of the best things that I can invite all of you guys to do is to mitigate your light environment. You have to fix this. Whether it's changing out light bulbs in your home, getting Iris Tech that's available in our store, getting specific light bulbs. Blue Blocks now offers a light bulb that you can get. They just launched it yesterday, so you can check those out. They're available through our store, biocharge.me. But glasses, covering up your skin, all of these things are going to be one of the best things you can do for your hormonal systems, but also for your energy production as well. So biocharge.me. If you guys are listening on a podcast. Everything will be available at extremehealthradio.com/659. If you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, there should be links. There's definitely links in the YouTube description, and there should be links in the Facebook description as well. So I really recommend you guys getting some of these and making them a part of your daily life. So we'll be right back. A couple points about today's show right after this.
Extreme Health Radio is your number one resource for cutting-edge biohacks, news, and information about how to upgrade every area of your health. Subscribe to our newsletter so you don't miss a thing.
You know, with the censorship that's going on, there's so much of it these days, and it's quite disheartening. But I just heard yesterday that Donald Trump signed a censorship sort of bill that went into effect, and this is going to affect censorship. And it's funny because I was telling Kate, like, with this whole censorship thing, it must be nice to be present, but I have to give him credit for doing this for one. But, you know, this is something that sites like ours and other websites and podcasts and radio shows that share the truth, we've been dealing with this for 6 years now. Massive censorship. And, you know, it's been prevalent. And it's funny because, you know, I've been complaining about this and upset about it for so long. And then all of a sudden, Donald Trump gets fact checked by Twitter. And then he launches this thing, you know, censorship, online censorship act that he did, which I'm super grateful for. But, gosh, it must be nice to be present where you can actually have a ability to do, to do these types of things. But the best way, so all that to say, the best way to stay up to date with our shows is sign up to our newsletter. And there's a little bonus right when you sign up, an extra added bonus that I can't mention here, but you'll see what it is once you join. And I really invite you guys to do that. That way you stay up to date with all of our past shows, our upcoming shows, and all that kind of stuff. And I really recommend that. That way you have options. You know, it really comes down to options when it comes to healing and health. So Beck is a member of the Academy, and she says that she has a sauna. Let's see. You guys are going awesome. A lot of cool stuff going on in the chat. Yeah, Rebecca says, it took me 4 months to break a sweat, and now she sweats a lot, and I've had it for a year and a half. Pirate Pete says you stopped receiving our emails. Maybe they're ending up in spam, which was probably you know, something that happens. Christina says, I have that far infrared sauna. I recommend this sauna for everyone who doesn't sweat. It's amazing. Yeah, it's great. Like Dr. Nunley was saying here too, that, you know, sometimes it's a lack of minerals and an overabundance of heavy metals that causes someone not to be able to sweat. So yeah, so I hope you guys enjoyed that show. I thought that was really good. I really like Jessica a lot, and I think that it's not one of those things where, you know, because there's a lot of people out there talking about keto and all these things, and, you know, I just intuitively, I just don't think that is correct. I don't think that putting your body through a metabolic stress like that, through a very restrictive diet, and you're removing entire macronutrients from your food profile, I just don't think that that's a healthy thing to do. You know, I kept thinking about those verses in the Bible that talk about, you know, when the Israelites were in the land of Canaan, and they were, or in the wilderness before they went into the land of Canaan in the Old Testament, they wandered around for 40 years, and they kept talking about how when they enter into the land of Canaan, they sent in spies to go check it out, and they came back and said, that land is filled with milk and honey. You know, and you see African tribes doing their persistence hunting, and part of what they sustain themselves on is, you know, is tons and tons of honey when they come across beehives, or the Maasai tribe drinking all that milk in Africa. And like she said, it's a context thing with our bodies and inability to create certain hormones that causes us to not be able to create the enzyme lactase to break down milk. So all that to say, I don't really drink milk. I like ghee, butter. What else do I like? Cheese. I do cheese. I do colostrum, obviously, from Sir Thrival. And that's about all the dairy I do. And I do the One World Whey, which is the whey protein that I like, that's from grass-fed Amish cows. That's a great product, too. I think that's in our store as well. But I do the whey, I do the colostrum, butter, cheese, that type of thing. Haven't gotten back on the milk yet, but now that I have the enzymes from Matt. And by the way, too, if you're looking for a good vitamin E that Jessica talked talked about, go to the MitoLife section of our biocharge.me. He's got some really great products. The vitamin E is there. It's called PUFA Protect. And I like supporting, Matt. He's just a great guy, and he's got the vitamin E. He's got the enzymes, digestive enzymes as well as metabolic enzymes as well. Great for breaking down scar tissue. So if you go to biocharge.me and search for enzymes or MitoLife, you'll see his products there too. So wanted to give Matt a little plug there because I found out from Jessica, or about Jessica, from Matt. So anyway, I hope you guys had a great day. Again, pass the show on to your friends. If you're on Instagram, maybe tag us or something, share it. I would greatly appreciate that. That helps get the show out to more and more people. And if you guys are looking for more information, come join us in the Academy. Come join us. And yeah, we'd love to have you in there. I'm doing live Zoom rooms every Monday through Thursday at 10 a.m. right now Pacific for an hour or so. And it's great to connect with you guys and share my knowledge and my experience, and maybe share some ideas that are going to help you guys. So the Academy is just your one-stop place for inspiration, for motivation, for real-time knowledge, great support from our community, courses, live workshops, all kinds of really cool stuff going on in our Academy. So if you're looking to upregulate your health, come and join us. There's a free 14-day trial if you guys want to check it out. Down and below, if you're watching on YouTube, there's a EHR14, a 14-day free trial. So you got nothing to lose. Just join us and see if you like it and connect with me. I'd love to help you out in any way I possibly can. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the show. That was episode 659. So I'll make everything available to the store, to the sponsors, to everything at extremehealthradio.com/659, as well as Jessica's Instagram and her page. So all you got to remember is our radio show, Extreme Health Radio, and then do /659, and I'll put all the links there for you. So if you're out and about right now, driving around, exercising, doing whatever, you can go check it out there. All right, guys, you guys are amazing. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you and just being a part of what we do. It's just, we couldn't do this kind of work without you. So really appreciate it. Hope you have a great weekend and you enjoy yourself and all of that. So thanks for sharing our show. Thanks for listening. We love you. Hopefully I'll see you in the Academy, and I'll talk to you next Friday.
No material on this blog is intended to suggest that you should not seek professional medical care. Always work with qualified medical professionals, even if you educate yourself in the field of live food, nutrition, and alternative medicine. I'm not a doctor, nor am I offering readers medical advice of any kind. None of the information offered here should be interpreted as a diagnosis of any disease, nor an attempt to treat or prevent any disease or condition. While information in this blog is discussed in the context of numerous conditions, it can be dangerous to take action based on any information in this blog or to start any health program without first consulting a health professional. The content found here is for informational purposes only and is in no way intended as medical advice, as a substitute for medical counseling, or as a treatment/cure for any disease or health condition, and nor should it be continued as such. Always work with a qualified healthcare professional before making any changes to your diet, prescription drug use, lifestyle, or exercise activities. This information is provided as is, and the reader/viewer assumes all risks from the use, non-use, or misuse of this information.